Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Circle Up and Get Real, where we talk about things that matter with people who matter. And today, you are the people who matter, you, the audience, because I don't have a guest today. And so, if you happen to be watching this live or later, please feel free to put comments in the chat if you're watching live, or just put up some comments. I don't believe it's always necessary to have conversations that are in person or even that are live. I think it's important to remember that while that's great to have live conversations and especially great to have in person conversations, it's not our connection is not dependent on us being in close proximity. I don't always think I've believed that my whole life. I think I used to believe that it was really important that I am with the people who can help me be the best version of me. And if I happen to live in a small town, too bad, so sad for me. I don't agree anymore. I mean, I grew up in a small town. I spent the first 3 years out of college in a small town. There were amazing humans in my hometown where I grew up and in the town where I spent my first 3 years out of college. However, that is not the end all be all, especially in this connected world we have now. If you happen to live in a remote location, it doesn't mean you are stuck without any human interaction. So let's just get that on the table right away. I prefer, personally, sitting at a restaurant with a friend or going over to a friend's house or having a beer with a friend. I prefer that, but I can't let that restrict me anymore because, boy, you're so dependent on where you got plopped in the universe if that's how you believe your human interaction will be. So today, what I want to talk about is this concept from Jim Collins, which he wrote about in his I think it was 2000 when the book came out, Good to Great, which is one of my absolute favorite books from then and now even. Even though it's 25 years old, it's still so good. And he has several concepts that have become just part of at least my language when I'm consulting or coaching, and a lot of people I know in the business world are really familiar with this book as well. So, one of the concepts that he talks about that I want to mention today, he calls first who, then what. Get the right people on the bus and then make sure they're in the right seats. Now, when I first heard about this concept back in 2000, actually, I heard about this before 2000 because I was a huge fan of Fast Company magazine back then. And I read that magazine cover to cover. And he was talking about how that book was coming out. Jim Collins, the author, was actually talking about that book in Fast Company. And as a member of a Fast Company community, I had access to a VHS tape of the publisher of Fast Company interviewing Jim Collins. And I value and treasure that VHS. I really need to make it into something that I can watch now because I don't even have a VCR anymore. But in that interview, man, I watched that over and over and over again. And I sensed so many things that in hindsight I can now put words to, but back then I didn't really know what I was sensing. There was some kind of connection between Alan, I can't remember his last name, Alan, the publisher of Fast Company, and Jim Collins. There were connections that were being made in that interview that I couldn't really articulate. But now thinking back on this topic of first who, then what, I recognize now that when humans come together in a way that brings out the best in each, there is truly a mastermind. The best of all of us comes together when we are in a spirit of harmony. That's the way Napoleon Hill. That's the way Napoleon Hill defined mastermind. The third entity that comes into the conversation when two or more are gathered together. And if if you think back on any interaction you've had in your work life or personal life where you feel like you just want to say something that you didn't bring with you into that conversation, that's probably an indication that you are in that space where the best of the two of you, or however many of you there are, is invited in. And I have experienced it many times, and now I don't even notice it as much as I used to, when I would be like, "Oh my gosh, I just thought of that," or "I can't believe that came up," or something like that. I would be kind of almost awestruck when that would happen. And now it's kind of a given, especially when I know I'm with people I feel comfortable with, people who know me well, people I can be real with. That that's just kind of a given that that will happen. But when he was talking about this in 2000, and he was talking about first who then what, like get all your people on the bus, not literally the bus, but get all the people on the bus and then figure out where the bus is going. That I couldn't wrap my head around that back in the day, because I thought, well, why would I get on a bus if I don't know where the bus is going? We got to know where we're going. Everything was very driven by a destination for me then. Back then, I was a driver and a goal getter, and I just did stuff and asked questions later. And the older I've gotten, the more I hope I've gotten wiser, the more introspective, the more self aware I've become. That concept of first who then what makes a whole lot of sense to me right now. So I'm reading about this concept in a book that Jim Collins wrote after he wrote the business book, which was Good to Great. This was Good to Great and the social sectors. So he took the concept of the business book and he changed it a little bit so that it could accompany that book, but would be written more for social enterprises, maybe not for profit groups. And he says at the beginning, Good to Great and the social sectors, why business thinking is not the answer, which is really curious. He says we must reject the idea, well-intentioned but dead wrong, that the primary path to greatness in the social sectors is to become more like a business. Dead wrong, he says. Most businesses, like most of anything else in life, fall somewhere between mediocre and good. Few are great. He recognized that through the research he did in the late 1990s, because he had 1,435 companies he was putting into the mix, and only 11 of them made the cut to go from good to great. So he says most businesses fall somewhere between mediocre and good, and few are great. When you compare great companies with good ones, many widely practiced business norms turn out to correlate with mediocrity, not greatness. So then why would we want to import the practices of mediocrity into the social sectors? I think that's really brilliant. So being normal, normalizing, doing what most people do is not going to get us to great in anything we're doing. Great is, in the business sense, results greater, better than the market. So he says, what makes you think it's a business concept that nonprofits are in desperate need of greater disciplined planning, disciplined people, disciplined governance, and disciplined allocation of resources? And the question was, what does that have to do with business? That's not a business concept. Most businesses also have a desperate need for greater discipline. And discipline, I'm not going to read you the whole thing here, but discipline is not a principle of business. It's a principle of greatness. And I think discipline is simply doing what you say you're going to do and doing it over time and doing it consistently. And if you continue to show up and you continue to do the things that you know will get you to the result you want, that's discipline. And very few companies, organizations, humans probably have that kind of discipline. And so this book is about discipline, and it's building a culture of discipline to become great. So he talks about first who then what as a concept that will get us in the social sectors, in your life, inside, outside work, in your life, to live a richer life. If you have the people in your life who will see you in the best possible light, challenge you when you need to be challenged, support you when you need to be supported, always be real and honest with you, you'll have a richer life. You'll go from good to great in all aspects of your life. So he says, the well, I'll hold this up again, and if you're watching the video, you can see it, good to great in the social sectors. But I want to just kind of riff on that for a second about the people, first who, then what. The people in our lives. I'm really fascinated by Simon Sinek's podcast called A Bit of Optimism, and how he interviews so many different people on his podcast. And lately, today I listened to his newest one, which was a little bit different, but still very much about connection, about human connection, about respect and appreciation for the humans he's interviewing and for the humans in his life. And he's demonstrating that through these podcasts, but also when he's a guest on other people's podcasts, because he's learning. As I watch his trajectory, I've known about him since 2009, how much more real and raw and vulnerable and authentic he's being in the relationships he has in his life. So he was on a podcast, or on his podcast, he interviewed the author, Will, whose last name I can't remember, but the author of Unreasonable Hospitality, which is a new book that just came out. He was a chef or an owner of a restaurant in New York, and Simon interviewed him on his podcast a while ago about his new book. And the conversation was more business-like, talking about the book, and about the concept of success in business. But then I watched the one he just did, I don't know, I guess I watched it last week, a newer conversation. And the conversation started out with the question, should you go into business with your friends? And that was a fascinating conversation, because these two guys who are friends, you didn't really get that vibe from the first podcast that they were as close as they are in the second podcast. But these are good friends who go to each other's houses, who are with each other, who in the podcast said, will say I love you to each other. Two guys. And there's so much to what Simon is learning from the work he's doing with the Navy SEALs, with military, about life in general, and about how important it is to find and make those connections in whatever area of life you're living. Whether it's business, it doesn't matter. Nonprofit, parenting, it doesn't matter. If we are not living our lives with the I don't want to say goal, but with the intention of deepening our relationships and the who's in our lives, then what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of huge business success if you have no one to share it with? I'm thinking now of It's a Wonderful Life. And if you've not seen that movie, I watch it every single Christmas. I have for years and years and years. I could recite it to you. And there are two people, if you haven't seen it. Jimmy Stewart plays George Bailey, and Barrymore, I can't remember his first name, Mr. Barrymore, plays Mr. Potter. And Mr. Potter's the banker, who is very, I would say in today's language, very narcissistic, very, it's about him. It's, he's the bad guy in a way, but he's really rich in money, not very rich in relationships. And George Bailey's just the opposite. Not very rich in money, but very rich in relationships. And every time I watch that, I think, I'm more like George Bailey. George, who had big aspirations and dreams about traveling the world and making a difference and being somebody, really famous, and then lived in his own hometown and had a much richer life because of the relationships he had in his life than Mr. Potter ever could, even though Mr. Potter had a ton of money. And so I think about the definition of wealth and the definition of rich. And George Bailey shows us that it really is about the people in your life. And I'm not saying that they're mutually exclusive. They certainly aren't. And there's nothing wrong with making a whole lot of money. Not at all. Yet if you choose one over the other, which one will give you a richer life, a fuller life? So I'm really aware of the value of relationships. And thank you to Simon, who is kind of reiterating this in the work he's doing right now. I watched a interview with him and Trevor Noah, another cool combination of people who are really good friends. And I just watched how they interacted with each other. And then if you watch other interviews with other people, you can kind of tell by nonverbal if a person is closer outside of work to that person, and not. You can kind of tell when you watch the interviews. Mel Robbins, great interview. I could just tell that they weren't as close as Trevor Noah and Simon Sinek were. So it's curious to me in a really cool way about how we might take this whole concept of relationship building and interpersonal work that starts with us, starts with knowing ourselves best, and so that we have the courage, I suppose, to go first in building those relationships. My new book, as I've told you about, Just Give a Shit. We've talked about this quite a bit in the last couple of episodes here, but the subtitle is Dare to Care. It takes courage to care. I wrote this, I was telling Chris, my friend Chris, earlier today, I wrote the subtitle. I mean, I wrote the book, but I didn't even realize how important the subtitle was until I'm really digging into the subtitle. I didn't even get into the subtitle in the book very much. But when I think about what it was that had me call it Dare to Care, Get Real, and Transform Your World, all of those words are really important. Dare to care. Get real, we know about that from this podcast, and transform your world. Transform is not change. Transform is experience something that's not even like what it used to be because of the work we've done to maybe dig into those relationships or understand that every time I go somewhere, I take myself with me. That sounds weird, but if there's a problem in my life, if there's a celebration in my life, I'm there for it. So wouldn't it be cool if I could figure myself out so that I could transform my world, your world, it says, my world of what? My family, my world of my town, my world of my work. And eventually, could that have an impact on the world? Sure, I believe it could. If we recognize that first who, then what is a concept to explore, just imagine what the right who's could do. And when I say right, I don't mean right as in right and wrong. I mean a group of people who are like-minded, like-hearted, willing to go first, willing to challenge and support each other. What could be available if we felt safe to be ourselves in that group? That's what I'm intending to have happen at Chill Out 2025, which is March 5th to the 7th. I don't know. I don't know if there are going to be 50 people there. I don't know if there are going to be 100 people there. I don't know if there are going to be 20 people there. I don't know. But I'm really, really trusting the model that I'm following this year, which is open space, which says whoever's here is the right people. Whenever it starts is the right time. Whatever happens here is the only thing that could have. And when it's done, it's done. That's the foundation, the fundamentals that we're putting into that space here in Fargo, March 5th to the 7th. And that experience is something I don't know how to tell people about. I don't know how to have people read about it. I think you have to be there. And what I'm learning about myself and my own joy, things that happen for me that bring me the most joy are things that I experience, not only things I read about. And going back to how I started this conversation about living in the middle of a small town in a remote location, the experience you have is limited by the opportunities you have to do stuff, I suppose, but it's not limited by the depth of the relationships you can build. And so if inside each of us we have this longing to belong, we have this longing to find a space and people with whom we can just be ourselves, that is universal. And I think that's evident and obvious and possible. I shouldn't say evident and obvious. It's possible wherever humans gather. So if I'm willing to go first, I'm going to ask questions that get to the heart of things. I have to just share a quick story. So I have new shelves. If you've been watching this podcast before and you've seen that I didn't have shelves yesterday, I have shelves today. I had these delivered, FedEx delivered them yesterday. And the guy who delivered them brought them in. They're on a pallet, on a cart. And I said, oh, I've got some work to do to put these shelves together. And he said, do you want me to help? And I said, well, yeah. And we were kind of laughing, haha. Yeah, I want you to help. And so he brought him back here. And I said, I'm actually not kidding. I'd love you to help. He goes, yeah, I know. Me too. Haha. It was a nice little interaction. He got in his truck and drove away. Well, today the FedEx truck pulled up and I heard the door open and I went out there and there was a package on our table and it was addressed to somebody who isn't in this office. It was addressed to somebody who's 2 offices over. And so I kind of ran back out to catch the FedEx truck before it left, and it was the same guy. It was the guy who delivered my shelves yesterday. And I told him, hey, we're 3330. This says 3310. So it's over there. And I said, you're the guy who delivered my shelves yesterday. He goes, yeah, I am. I said, do you want to see him? And he goes, I do. So he got out of his truck and he came back in and I showed him my shelves and he went, wow, those look great. We had that connection. I'll maybe never see him again. But in the moment we were together, we were authentically connected. It was so much fun. And I'm sure he had as much fun as I did. He jumped off the truck, ran in, looked at, and took off. We have that opportunity all the time. First who in all of our lives? First who? Then what? We'll figure out the what if we have those kinds of people in the room. And I think back to a quote that is on a shirt I got from somebody. From my friend David is a networking guru, and he gave me a shirt that says, you can never say the right thing to the wrong people or the wrong thing to the right people. And if you really take that in, that's kind of cool, isn't it? You can't say the wrong thing to the right people. They'll give you grace. They'll forgive you. They won't try to throw you under a bus, to go back to the bus analogy. And you can't say the right thing to the wrong people. No matter what you say, no matter what you try, if it's not your people, it will never land. And so I'm rethinking this whole quote, this whole concept from good to great, first who, then what. And I'm really grateful for the people in my life. And I'm looking forward to whoever comes to Chill Out. If you're interested in this, I'd love to give you more information, or you can go to chilloutfargo.com. Let's get together. Let's get in a space together, because how do you know what could happen there unless you're there? Every single human will impact the possibilities for that event. And it may resonate with people and it may not. And that's okay. There's no harm, no foul. But you won't know if you're not there. So as always, everybody, just do what you can this week to get real. Radical, energized, authentic, learning focused. Pick up my book. You can get it at Amazon or from me. I have a bunch of them. Shoot me a message and tell me you want a book. I'll send you one. It's very simple. It is so simple. It's so simple. And notice how I have to write my name on my own version so I don't give it to somebody else, my own book. So reach out. Do something. If you feel compelled to do something, take that action, but take it from a place of authenticity, not a place of shoulding. So just notice that distinction and follow what your heart's telling you. If that's to come to Chill Out, then do it. I look forward to seeing you there or wherever our paths may cross, in real life or virtually. Take care. See ya.